Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the story of a kingdom that, according to the map, never moved, but somehow ended up on the wrong continent. You wander into a palace shaded by broadleaf trees, with heavy humid air that smells faintly of wood smoke and crushed mangoes. In the distance you hear drums echo, soft and slow, like a heartbeat keeping time for the past. You're in the Kingdom of Kongo, a place that once held power, culture, and faith so strong it wrote to the Pope. Yet today it seems to have vanished without leaving a proper address. It's still there, sort of, but also, maybe not. This is one of those cases where the land stayed put, but the geography didn't. Through a combination of tectonic drift, cartographic chaos, colonial reshuffling, and centuries of cultural echoes, the legacy of Kongo now ripples through more than one continent. And if you're wondering how any of this happened, well, good news. We have 2 sleepy hours to stroll through it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're here, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little channel travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the royal heart of the Kingdom of Kongo, somewhere around the 14th century, in a palace not made of marble, but of earth and spirit. The walls are painted red with river clay, the roofs thatched with palm leaves, and outside, chickens wander like they have diplomatic immunity. It's not grand in the European sense, but it's alive, complex, and politically brilliant. At its peak, the kingdom stretched across parts of modern-day Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Republic of Congo, and even bits of Gabon. Imagine a realm that reached from the Atlantic coast deep into the rainforest, with networks of roads, provincial governors, and an entire nobility system. The capital was Mbanza, Congo, a bustling, sun-drenched hub where traders, messengers, and poets gathered. And yes, there were poets. The kingdom's kings, known as Manikongo, ruled over a sophisticated society that blended local beliefs with the early whispers of European influence. This was a time when maps were more suggestion than science, and the lines that did exist were drawn by people who'd never been there. Sometimes they were copied from maps of other places entirely. There's at least one map from the 1500s that accidentally shows the Nile crossing the equator twice. Here's where things get fun. The Kingdom of Kongo starts interacting with Portugal in the late 1400s. The Portuguese arrive expecting to trade, convert, and probably plunder, like they usually did. But the Congo king at the time, Nzinga Nkuwu, flips the script. He converts to Christianity, renames himself Yuan I, and starts sending embassies to Europe. Historians still argue whether this was a tactical move or a genuine conversion, but either way, it was bold. Imagine the cultural whiplash of praying to Jesus while still making offerings to your ancestral spirits. Multitasking, royal edition. But something stranger starts to happen, not just politically but geographically. As Europe's interest in Africa grows, so does the weirdness of its maps. By the 1600s, cartographers begin drawing lines and names in ways that start to split the Congo apart, not because anything moved, but because foreign observers misunderstood it. Some maps place Mbanza Congo near rivers that don't exist. Others copy each other's mistakes until the kingdom starts appearing further and further west. And by further west, I mean suspiciously close to Brazil. You're not dreaming. A few Renaissance-era maps label Brazil with river names taken straight from the Congo basin. Historians still debate whether this was due to actual navigational confusion, shared trade routes, or just one really sleepy mapmaker who copied the wrong coastline. And yet, the cultural echoes would later seem to support it. Rituals, foods, and even words from the Congo began appearing in northeastern Brazil. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back in Congo, you stroll down a marketplace shaded by broad banana leaves, and listen as traders negotiate in a mix of Kikongo and Portuguese. A boy runs past carrying a basket of smoked fish. A noblewoman walks with a leopard on a leash as if it's the most natural thing in the world. And somewhere behind a carved wooden screen, the Manikongo is receiving envoys, some from the provinces, some from Lisbon. The air is warm, almost heavy, and though you're standing firmly in Central Africa, it somehow feels as though you're balanced between continents. The soil under your feet hasn't moved, but the identity of this land is already starting to slip. You're still in the royal courtyard, but now it's dusk. The reddish glow of the setting sun bounces off clay walls, and the rhythmic buzz of cicadas fills the air. In the distance, a horn echoes through the hills, a sound that once marked the opening of court, now just part of the evening hush. This is Mbanza, Kongo, and you start to feel how deep and quiet the kingdom runs. And now you look at a map. Not one of the glossy satellite things you'd pull up on your phone, but a wrinkled, weather-stained piece of parchment from the 17th century, where Africa is both too big and too small in all the wrong places. If you tilt your head, the Kingdom of Kongo is right where you'd expect it, snug along the west coast of Africa. But tilt it the other way, and suddenly there's a second Congo labelled faintly across the Atlantic, where Brazil begins. What happened? To understand this cartographic oddity, you need to dive into the world of colonial-era maps, a world where borders were often more fiction than fact. European map makers of the early modern period weren't just geographers, they were guessers, gossip collectors, and occasional plagiarists. And when it came to places like Congo, their information often came second-hand, sometimes third-hand, occasionally whispered by a sailor who swore he saw a golden city somewhere inland. What made Congo particularly tricky was its political structure. The kingdom wasn't a tight block of territory, but rather a constellation of provinces and client states, some loyal, some semi-independent, all wrapped into a single identity. This made drawing a neat line around Congo nearly impossible. You couldn't draw what didn't behave like a European state. To make things messier, Congo's influence extended into neighbouring kingdoms like Ndongo, Matamba, and Loango, creating a loose web of overlapping sovereignty. Some parts traded more with Portuguese outposts than with each other. Some rulers considered themselves vassals to Congo, others not so much. Historians still argue whether the Congo kings actually controlled their claimed territory or simply acted like they did in their letters to Europe. And those letters? Oh, they were ambitious. Some claimed dominion over lands they'd never even seen. Think of it like a medieval version of putting a flag in someone's backyard while they're on vacation. Useful for diplomacy, terrible for maps. Now, when Portuguese explorers began carving out trading posts along the Angolan coast, they started redrawing these fuzzy lines in ways that made sense to them. Empires like neat borders. To the Portuguese, everything between Luanda and the rainforest became a chessboard of concessions, treaties, and protectorates. This would be like someone walking into your house, labelling the living room New Couchlandia, and telling your neighbours you agreed to it in a language you don't speak. It also didn't help that European maps began absorbing political bias. Portuguese cartographers were naturally inclined to make their holdings look bigger and more permanent than they really were. So you end up with maps showing Congo sliced up like a birthday cake, even when those lines had no relation to the actual terrain, culture, or politics. But here's the real twist. The confusion didn't just affect Africa. Some of those geographical errors drifted across the Atlantic, whether through mistaken reports, purposeful embellishment, or weird trade route overlaps. Several early European maps of Brazil began labelling parts of its northeastern region with names suspiciously similar to Congo provinces. Scholars debate whether this was accidental mimicry or some belief in a mythical mirror Congo across the sea. And yes, there's at least one 1600s French map that shows a Rio Congo running through the jungle of Maranhão, Brazil. The first time you see it, you assume it's a mistake. The second time, you start squinting. Now imagine a 17th century sailor from Lisbon returning home after a year in Brazil. He hears someone talking about the Kingdom of Kongo and says, "Oh yeah, I think I passed through there." His listener nods and scribbles it down. Boom, Kongo now exists on 2 continents. Standing in the twilight of the real Congo, you can sense the frustration that must have filled the royal court. The Manikongo wanted to be recognised, not duplicated, not divided. They sent ambassadors to Lisbon and the Vatican. They gifted ivory, textiles, and clever metaphors. And still, the world kept rearranging their lines on the map. as if the kingdom were a spilled drink being mopped up by different empires. Meanwhile, in the capital, life went on. Children played with carved wooden masks, women pounded cassava under the watch of weathered statues, and the smell of fermented palm wine drifted through the alleys. You start to understand something important. Geography, for the Kongo people, wasn't something that could be drawn. It was lived, through rituals, river crossings, and the stories told around the fire. So while Europe kept trying to pin them down with rulers and ink, the real Congo remained defiantly unboxed. Its borders were human, not drawn, defined by kinship, custom, and memory. As the sun dips below the treetops and the stars blink awake above the savannah, you begin to feel what the mapmakers never could. You are still, but everything around you moves, not fast, not loud, but like roots growing underground. Silent, persistent, unmistakably alive. It's some time after midnight now, though time feels less linear out here. The moon is high, your feet rest gently on warm packed soil, and the night air carries a softness that makes you forget where you started. From the slow chant of insects to the far-off crackle of a ceremonial fire, the kingdom breathes around you. Tonight, you're not just travelling through space, you're floating through time. The ground beneath you is the same, but something deep below it is always shifting, literally. Because the next part of our dreamy journey, it starts underground, long before maps, before kings, even before chickens learned to cross roads. The Earth was a jigsaw puzzle in slow motion. The theory of plate tectonics, quiet, sleepy science if ever there was one, suggests that all of Earth's continents were once smushed together into one big landmass, Pangaea. Cozy, if a bit crowded. Over hundreds of millions of years, the plates drifted apart like polite guests at a long party. South America peeled off from Africa, and the two continents slowly danced away from each other across the Atlantic. If you've ever stared at the two coastlines and noticed they look like puzzle pieces, congratulations. Your brain has spotted the leftovers of that ancient rift. And here's the soft wrinkle. Many scientists believe the geological seam that split Pangaea ran straight through where the Kingdom of Kongo would later rise. That means, in a very ancient sense, the land beneath Congo and the land beneath Brazil were once neighbours, roommates even, sharing one large slab of real estate. So while the Kingdom of Kongo didn't move in any conventional sense, the land it sat on had already done some serious shifting, long before humans built palaces or argued about borders. The Earth, it turns out, has a long memory and even longer to-do lists. Now, this tectonic backstory gets especially interesting when you consider the modern parallels between West Central Africa and Eastern South America. Some rock formations match, some fossil lines trace similar stories, and there's ongoing debate among geologists about whether certain rare minerals found in Angola also appear, mysteriously, in parts of Brazil's San Francisco Craton. Historians still argue whether this is coincidence or tectonic inheritance, but it does start to feel like continents remember each other even when humans forget. It's almost poetic. The Kingdom of Kongo, rising on land that used to sit beside Brazil, then centuries later being mistaken for Brazil by cartographers and colonists who didn't know any better. Like the Earth had whispered an inside joke to history and no one caught it. And while we're here, let's not skip the quirks. For example, there's an obscure theory, still discussed in some historical fringe circles, that one of the reasons African and Brazilian flora look so eerily similar is because certain plants survived the continental split and evolved in parallel. Botanists, bless them, remain skeptical, but it's hard to deny the uncanny feeling when you walk under a banana tree in Congo and find the same tree, bent the same way, in a market in Bahia. The bananas don't care about colonial boundaries, they just want sun, water, and a little gossip. Meanwhile, back in Congo, the tectonic pace of change contrasts sharply with the sudden shifts brought by European intrusion. One moves at a glacial pace, the other like a sword slicing through parchment. But in both cases, something is being broken apart, rearranged, redrawn. You walk along a ridge that overlooks the Congo River. Its path snakes west, the moonlight turning it silver. It's a river so vast it often seems more like a liquid highway than a mere water source. And below your feet, the African tectonic plate hums quietly and endlessly, shifting millimeters each year. The kingdom may be gone, the maps may lie, but the land is still moving, just slower than any emperor could ever comprehend. Here's a fun tidbit. One of the most enduring local myths about the Earth's movement is the story of the sleeping giant beneath the Congo River. Some elders say that the rumble you occasionally feel in the earth isn't an earthquake, it's the giant shifting in his dreams. The river, they say, is his breath. It's a lovely metaphor for tectonics, don't you think? The earth isn't shaking, it's dreaming. And you're still here, listening. As the stars twinkle overhead and the frogs croak in slow harmony from the reeds, you feel like maybe you've caught a glimpse of time's secret rhythm. The Kingdom of Kongo never had to move to find itself somewhere else. The continents did that for it, ages before kings or maps or names. You're standing still, but the world around you never has been. Morning doesn't arrive here with a bang. It seeps in slowly like honey poured over warm bread. The mist over the valley starts to lift. The air smells of river reeds and early cooked maize. You wake, or perhaps more accurately you become aware again, to the sound of water. A deep, patient rushing, like the earth clearing its throat. You follow it. It leads you to the great glimmering ribbon that is the Congo River. Wide as a dream, slow as a thought, it cuts through the kingdom like an open palm. This river has always been the lifeline of the region. It feeds the crops, floats the trade, and carries the stories. Some whispered upstream, others sent off like driftwood, hoping to be found again. And here's where things start to echo. Because if you squint, and I mean really squint, across history, across oceans, you'll find another river on the far side of the Atlantic that mirrors this one in uncanny ways. The Amazon, that sprawling, meandering, life-drenched monster of a river that coils through Brazil like a vine looking for sky. Now, are they the same river? Of course not. But they are siblings, or maybe ancient twins who grew apart. And here's the truly mind-scratching bit. Some scientists believe that millions of years ago, before the continents drifted apart, there may have been a single, unified river system, one that split during the tectonic breakup of Gondwana, the supercontinent before even Pangaea. That's right. The Congo and the Amazon may have once been one stream, flowing lazily across a world that no longer exists. You imagine it now, a river so vast it curled through what we now call Africa and South America in one lazy, watery stretch. No one owned it, no maps named it, no king taxed it, just a massive, snaking memory of Earth's earliest wet whispers. Of course, mainstream science remains cautious. Geologists toss around words like hypothesis and preliminary modelling, and historians politely shake their heads at anything that can't be footnoted. But folklore? Folklore remembers differently. In Congo, there are tales of a river that stretched beyond the sky, one that mirrored itself on the other side of the world, like a snake biting its own tail. It's the kind of story you'd tell your children while roasting cassava under starlight, the kind you whisper when maps no longer make sense. Meanwhile, on the Brazilian side, in the heart of Afro-Brazilian communities, spiritual songs and dances sometimes invoke river spirits that sound suspiciously familiar to Congo traditions. Not just in tone, but in name, in rhythm, in presence. Historians still argue whether this is due solely to enslaved peoples bringing their culture across the ocean, or if something deeper, something wetter, was already connecting the two places long before ships arrived. And so, you walk along the Congo River with that strange feeling again. Déjà vu, maybe. Or like the river is telling you an inside joke it also told the Amazon. The birds overhead call in short, staccato cries. A canoe glides by, its paddle hitting the water with a hypnotic shh, shh, shh. You follow a path down to the shore, past young boys setting fishing nets, and a woman brushing her hair with a comb carved from bone. She sings softly, a lullaby about a boat that sails not west or east, but inward. Now consider this. The same plant species thrive along both the Congo and Amazon basins. There are edible roots that taste the same, trees that produce the same golden sap, even similar fish, with eyes like polished stones. Scholars will point to biology, to convergent evolution, to human migration. But you, in this slow dream of geography, feel something else entirely. A kind of echo. And then there's the language. Some Kikongo words share sound roots with Creole dialects spoken in Bahia and Maranhão, not just as a result of forced migration, but from how those words survived. They weren't lost in transit. They floated, on water, on rhythm, on the breath of people who refuse to let geography erase them. So perhaps, when we say the Kingdom of Kongo shifted continents, it wasn't just the mapmakers who made it happen. Maybe the river helped. Maybe memory did. Maybe it was the slow, unmeasurable migration of culture, moving not with armies, but with fishermen, farmers, and dreamers. The Congo River, once thought to flow in opposite directions at once, yes, that's a real thing. It's called a bidirectional current in certain segments, becomes a metaphor, not just for geography, but for history. Things don't always move in straight lines, not rivers, not people, not ideas. You pause. Watch the current pull a palm leaf downstream. It spins, circles, hesitates, then moves on. Like a kingdom that never moved, but still arrived somewhere else. The river fades behind you now, like a dream slipping away in daylight. You're walking back toward the heart of the kingdom, but everything feels different. The streets are quieter. The drums have fallen silent. And in the market square where yesterday you saw fish and fabrics and a man trying to sell you a rooster with a noble spirit, today you see something new. Flags. Thin, flapping in the breeze. Foreign, sharp-coloured flags. Red crosses, gold lions, designs that have never belonged to this soil. You rub your eyes. You didn't fall asleep, but something has changed. The Kingdom of Kongo has become a colony. It didn't happen overnight, but it might as well have. What began as a mutually respectful trade relationship, Portuguese ships bringing cloth, tools, missionaries, and sometimes just very fancy chairs, turned darker over the centuries. Slowly, subtly, the balance of power began to shift, and by the late 1600s that shift had a sound. Muskets, cannons, the clink of chains. The Kingdom of Kongo, once proud and autonomous, had been drawn into the orbit of Portugal's imperial ambitions. Their alliance had advantages, of course, access to firearms, European goods, even diplomatic recognition. But there was a cost, and that cost came in ships, specifically ships that sailed west. Enslaved people, men, women, children, began disappearing from Congo's interior at a rate that would fracture entire villages. Some were sold by rival provinces. Others were captured in wars sparked by Portuguese traders playing local leaders against each other. Historians still argue whether the Mani-Congos had any real power to stop it, or whether they were caught in a system too vast and brutal to control. The capital, Mbanza Kongo, began to look less like a royal seat and more like a negotiation table. You picture a king sitting on a carved throne, fanning himself in the heat, while a Portuguese trader spreads out a map, one with new lines on it. Lines that ignore rivers, villages, and people. Lines that turn kingdoms into rectangles. These maps didn't just redraw borders, they redefined ownership. And one day, a governor in Lisbon looked at a map and declared, "This land is ours." No one in Congo was asked. It's one of the oldest tricks in geography. Erase the name, and the place starts to disappear. The Mani-Congo still ruled in name, but power was slipping fast, like sand through fingers. And with power went language, trade rights, and eventually, land. The kingdom was being absorbed not just politically, but cartographically. By the 1800s, most European maps didn't even label Congo as a kingdom anymore. Just a region, a collection of resources, a convenient shipping route. You walk now through a village where the signs are in Portuguese, but the people still speak Kikongo. A boy chases chickens between crumbling walls that once enclosed a noble court. The stones remember. The maps, not so much. It wasn't just the Kingdom of Kongo being divided either. The entire African continent was under the knife. In 1884, European powers held a little get-together in Berlin to formally partition Africa. There were no Africans at the table, of course, just European men with cigars, moustaches, and strong opinions about rivers they'd never seen. The Berlin Conference created a patchwork of colonies that ignored ethnic groups, ecosystems, and existing kingdoms. Kongo, chopped, merged, renamed, reassigned. Some parts became Angola, others were folded into the Belgian Congo. Still others were listed as unclaimed, a chilling word when you remember that people had been living there for centuries. One curious case, the border between Portuguese and Belgian-controlled regions. It cut across rivers and villages, like someone drawing with a shaky hand. There's still a stretch of land in present-day Angola where families live on one side of the road, but vote in another country. Here's a strange bit of trivia for you. At least 2 European mapmakers in the 19th century placed the same river twice on their charts. Once in Angola and again in Brazil. One river, 2 continents. It's unclear whether this was a printing error, a case of mistaken identity, or just a very confused intern with a ruler and a deadline. But that's the mood now, isn't it? Confusion, displacement, a kingdom that didn't move, but got moved around anyway. You sit down on the edge of a stone foundation. It was once a council chamber. Now it's just a platform where goats nap in the sun. And you imagine a royal advisor centuries ago asking, if we still live here, if we still speak the old tongue, are we still the kingdom? No one answered then. But tonight, maybe you will. You rise again, brushing red dust from your palms. The goats don't move. The village stretches quietly in the morning haze, humming with distant cooking fires and the low clatter of clay pots. But your next step takes you not forward, but sideways, into a story that begins not in the forest or on a map, but in a dream. You're in the late 15th century now. The Manikongo is named Nzinga Nkuu, but he's been staying up at night. Dreams keep troubling him. He sees figures in white robes, hears hymns in an unfamiliar language, and sees again and again a bearded man nailed to a cross. The vision grows so persistent that he finally calls his advisors together and asks, "Who is this?" Not long after, a group of Portuguese missionaries arrives. There's some debate, still, over how much of what followed was spiritual awe versus political calculation. Historians still argue whether Nzinga Nkuu saw Christianity as divine truth, or just a useful diplomatic tool in dealing with the powerful Portuguese crown. Either way, he converts, takes the name João I, builds churches, wears a cross on his royal robes, and just like that, the Kingdom of Kongo becomes one of the first Christian kingdoms in sub-Saharan Africa. Now don't picture the soaring cathedrals of Europe. These churches were built from local materials, mud brick, raffia roofing, mango wood crucifixes. The liturgy may have come from Lisbon, but the rhythm? That belonged to Kongo. You walk into one now. A cool, low building, its air thick with incense and palm smoke. You hear voices singing, not Gregorian chants, but call and response Kikongo hymns infused with Catholic themes. Mary, referred to in the native tongue as Mama Maria, is depicted with traditional headscarves and bare feet. Jesus is painted the colour of dark earth, and over the altar, carved into wood, is a curious detail, a dove, and beneath it, a traditional sun symbol from Kongo cosmology. This wasn't conversion, this was fusion. The Portuguese may have brought the doctrine, but the Kongo people folded it into their own cosmology, like palm oil into cassava, thick, flavourful, and uniquely their own. There's even a story, part history, part folk tale, that tells of St. James appearing in the jungle. Not the desert, not the Holy Land, the jungle. According to the tale, he didn't speak Latin but Kikongo, and he didn't wear sandals. He wore woven forest slippers. He came not to conquer, but to advise. You smile. Even saints know to adapt their style here. Some scholars argue that this blend of Catholicism and indigenous spirituality created a truly hybrid theology, one that offered both divine legitimacy to the monarchy and comfort to a population already deeply spiritual. Others say it muddied the faith. But if you ask the woman lighting a candle next to the mango tree outside the chapel, she'll tell you it works. It's always worked. The church in Kongo became a diplomatic weapon as much as a religious one. The Manikongo wrote to popes. Some of those letters survive, elegant, formal, requesting bishops, asking for books, and occasionally complaining about Portuguese misunderstandings. You can almost hear the subtext. Please, send help. Also, your traders are kind of being a problem. It's worth noting that Kongo royalty were baptized, trained in Latin, and occasionally sent sons to European courts. For a brief, flickering moment, it almost seemed like Kongo might become a kind of African Portugal, a partner, not a subject. But the balance was fragile. The introduction of Christianity didn't erase local beliefs. It wrapped them in new garments. Ancestor worship didn't disappear. It quietly slipped behind saint statues. Rain rituals didn't stop. They were simply done on feast days. And so here you are, standing between two worlds. The ground under your feet remains Kongo. But the sky overhead? It carries prayers in two languages, two traditions, and two histories now bound together like reeds in a basket. Even the architecture begins to shift. Look closer, and you'll see that what at first appears to be a cruciform layout is actually built over a much older ceremonial space. The path to the altar follows the same route as the traditional circle of elders. Nothing is lost, it just wears new names. You follow a child carrying a wooden cross up a dusty hill, his feet kicking up little ghosts of red soil. He hums a song, half hymn, half lullaby, about a boat that crosses two oceans and lands in no particular place. You hum it too, and feel it settle somewhere behind your ribs. So yes, the Kingdom of Kongo had visions, and yes, saints came to the jungle, but it was never just about belief. It was about identity, about a people who took what they were given, bent it gently, and made it their own. And in doing so, they made something new, a kingdom not just of land, but of the spirit, one that could survive maps, borders, and even history itself. You leave the chapel behind, its songs still echoing in the morning air, and walk further toward a clearing where the ground seems worn down by the passing of important feet. There's no stone plaque, no bronze statue, just packed soil and soft breeze. But this is where it happened, a meeting, a signature, a moment when lines were drawn not just across the land, but across time. It was the late 1800s. Europe was deep in its scramble for Africa phase, like kids rushing to the biggest candy jar in history, except the candy was land, and the consequences were permanent. And so, in 1884, the Berlin Conference was held, an event with more moustaches per square metre than any other diplomatic meeting in history. There were no Congolese delegates present, no Manikongo, no elders, just European representatives puffing cigars and slicing up a continent they'd mostly only seen through spyglasses. One of the most consequential outcomes of that conference was the rapid conversion of once sovereign kingdoms, like Kongo, into territories defined by treaties. Or rather, treaties. The Kingdom of Kongo had already suffered centuries of foreign manipulation by then, but it was here, in the documents drafted during and after that conference, that its erasure began to solidify. The Treaty of Simulambuco, signed in 1885 between Portugal and the so-called Chiefs of Cabinda, declared the region a Portuguese protectorate. Now pause for a second. If you're picturing a formal table, pens, a shared understanding, and possibly complimentary tea, don't. The treaty was written in Portuguese. Few local leaders could read it. Some accounts suggest they were offered symbolic gifts like cloth or rum. Others believe the document was explained only partially, if at all. Historians still argue whether the signatories fully understood what they were signing, or if they were signing anything at all. The problem with treaties, you see, is that maps take them very seriously. Overnight, regions long part of the Kingdom of Kongo, areas that recognized the Manikongo as their spiritual and political leader, were legally transformed into Portuguese holdings. Lands were divided into colonies and provinces. Mbanza Kongo became São Salvador. The king's authority became symbolic. The kingdom, on paper, was gone. But here's the twist. In many places, local people didn't really notice. Not because they didn't care, but because the real geography of Kongo wasn't written in ink. It was carried in the body, in songs sung while planting millet, in the rhythm of drums during naming ceremonies, in the tilt of a head when addressing elders. The land still felt like Kongo. And so it was. You sit now beside one of the old pathways leading from the capital to a provincial village. This road predates colonial rule. It was maintained not by foreign engineers, but by locals who knew the curves by heart. Stones still line the sides, worn smooth by hundreds of years of passing feet. Along this path once walked royal messengers carrying news to distant governors. Later, missionaries used it to reach outposts, and eventually soldiers used it to impose new laws. The road never changed, only the shoes that travelled it. And the language? Well, that started shifting too. Portuguese was introduced officially, of course, in schools and churches, but Kikongo never vanished. Instead, the two languages danced together, creating a unique hybrid where prayers could be half Latin, half proverb. In some towns, sermons began in Portuguese but ended with ancestral blessings. Geography didn't erase culture, it rearranged it. And here's a quirky little detail. In some documents from the late 19th century, Portuguese administrators complained that maps were useless in certain Congo regions because the locals refused to acknowledge borders. They walked across colonial lines like they didn't exist, which to them, they didn't. One village chief, when told he was now part of a new administrative district, reportedly asked, "Did the land move?" When told no, he replied, "Then I belong to the same king." You smile at that. It's the kind of logic only geography for sleep would appreciate. Simple, defiant, rooted in truth. You rise and continue walking. Birds stir in the canopy above. Somewhere in the distance, a woman calls out to her children in Kikongo, her voice echoing across a land that refuses to forget itself. Maps may have changed, names may have shifted, but the ground beneath you? Still Congo. And that treaty, signed without true consent, misunderstood, mistranslated, manipulated, was just paper. This earth, this road, these people, far more permanent. You've been walking for hours now, but it doesn't feel like it. The path has turned lush. Banana trees arch over your head, their broad leaves trembling gently in the wind like green sails. The air is thick with the scent of sweet rot and clay. Somewhere nearby, water drips slowly from palm fronds onto the curved surface of a gourd bowl. And then you hear it, laughter, human, familiar, echoing between woven hut walls. You turn a corner and find yourself in the middle of a small gathering, a circle of elders, a pot bubbling over an open fire, and between them, stacked on a flat reed mat, are bananas, lots of bananas. Now that may not sound remarkable, but if there's one crop that's travelled more than any sailor, it's this one. And here in the former Kingdom of Kongo, bananas are more than just breakfast. They're evidence. You sit, quietly invited, and listen to the conversation. It shifts easily between Kikongo, Portuguese, and a third rhythm that feels older than both. Someone hands you a banana leaf folded into a packet. You open it. Grilled fish, stewed greens, a pinch of salt gathered from a nearby rock pool. It tastes like the rainforest had a story and decided to tell it through food. What's on your plate? Geography, actually. Bananas, like people, have a migration story. Originally cultivated in Southeast Asia, they made their way through trade routes across India, down the Swahili coast, and eventually into Central Africa. Long before the Portuguese ever arrived, Congo had them already. But once the transatlantic slave trade began, those same plants hitched rides on European ships heading west. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find entire Afro-Brazilian communities growing nearly identical banana cultivars in the forests of Bahia. Historians still argue whether the Brazilian strain arrived with Portuguese colonists who picked it up in Angola, or whether enslaved Africans brought seeds tucked in cloth bundles. Either way, bananas crossed continents, quietly, persistently, just like the people who once harvested them. And then there's the cousin trade, humans. It's a difficult topic. Sleepy as this narration may be, the sorrow of what happened cannot be fully softened. Families torn, cultures fragmented, yet somehow traces of connection remained. You shift in your seat as an elder begins to tell a story. Not the kind with dragons or battles, but the kind about his grandmother and her grandmother, and a cousin they believe ended up somewhere on the other side of the salt water. He doesn't know the name, but he says she danced the same way they still do here, tapping the ground with her heel twice before spinning. Is it memory? Is it folklore? Is it muscle passed down through bone? No one knows. But then someone starts drumming. Not loud, not for show, just a low, even rhythm. You feel it in your ribs before you hear it properly, and the cadence, well, it wouldn't be out of place in the favelas of Rio. Which brings us to another curiosity: dance. Many of the traditional dances of the Congo region, particularly the semba, with its swaying hips and offbeat claps, survive today in Brazilian samba. Coincidence? Maybe. But when you hear both, your feet seem to think otherwise. And that's not all. Certain culinary techniques, like fermenting cassava and cooking it in banana leaves, are practiced almost identically across both sides of the Atlantic. Even the mortars used for pounding maize are nearly indistinguishable in form and function. Geography, it seems, doesn't erase, it mirrors. You're told that one of the older women in the village once visited Brazil as part of a cultural exchange. She didn't speak the language, but at a market in Salvador, she found herself face to face with a woman selling palm oil stew, moqueca, who looked just like her cousin. Neither could explain it, but both cried. Is that geography, culture, or something in between? The elders around the fire now discuss cousins again, royal cousins this time. You learn that marriage was once a diplomatic tool of the Manikongo, and that members of the royal family were sometimes married off to nobility from neighbouring kingdoms like Ndongo, Matamba, and Loango. Occasionally, rumours even floated that children of these unions ended up in Portuguese households or in faraway colonies. One whispered tale suggests a royal child from Congo ended up in Brazil, baptized and renamed João Miguel, his lineage erased, but his skin the colour of kings. Of course, historians still argue about that one. But you sit there, watching banana leaves curl in the firelight, and wonder what it would mean to be royalty on one continent and anonymous on another, to be cousin to a throne and yet sold as cargo. It's a hard thought, but it lingers gently, like smoke rising in spirals. Then someone passes you another leaf packet. Inside is something sweet this time. Mashed plantain with honey and crushed peanuts. You eat it slowly. Because you realise that while maps can distort and treaties can lie, food remains honest. It carries memory, it carries culture, and sometimes it carries cousins across oceans. You lean back now, belly full, and watch the smoke rise up into the trees. Above, a monkey howls like it's trying to tell a story it forgot halfway through. You smile. You'll stay just a bit longer. Because in this sleepy geography, even bananas have passports. You leave the village after a long goodbye. One of the elders insists you take a small carved charm. Wood, worn smooth by time and palm oil. Protection, she says with a nod. And memory. You tuck it into your pocket, though you're not sure from which it protects you more. The trail winds gently now, taking you through fields dotted with cassava, yam, and wild hibiscus. Every so often, you pass a shrine made of stones and shells, barely waist high. They sit there quietly, like forgotten punctuation marks in the landscape. And then you remember a story, a strange one, almost unbelievable. A letter, not from here, but written there. You're now in the early 1500s, and a new Manikongo rules, King Afonso I. His Kikongo name was Mvembatam Nzinga, but history tends to remember the names that fit into European tongues more neatly. Afonso had been educated by missionaries, baptized and trained in the Latin alphabet. He was devout, diligent, and increasingly desperate. Because what Afonso saw around him was not the promised partnership with Portugal. It was a slow unravelling. Local rulers were being manipulated. Weapons were flowing in, but not always under his control. And worst of all, his people, his subjects, were being stolen. Afonso wrote many letters to Portugal, particularly to King John III, pleading for help in controlling the slave trade. In one famous letter, dated 1526, he wrote that the Portuguese were taking every day our natives, sons of the land and sons of our noblemen. He tried to ban the sale of free persons. He begged for priests, for doctors, for teachers. Instead, he got merchants. Historians still argue whether Afonso's appeals were ignored outright or simply lost amid the machinery of profit. But what remains is this: a black African king, writing in dignified Portuguese, signing letters with a royal seal, asking, sometimes begging, for his kingdom's autonomy to be respected. It's a haunting document. You picture him seated at a desk, perhaps in a courtyard under jacaranda trees, dictating to a scribe. There are birds calling overhead, children running past the wall, and all the while the coast is filling with ships. Ships bound for the New World. Ships that would carry pieces of Kongo with them. Language, rhythm, names, scars. Pieces that would never fully return. And Afonso wasn't alone. Letters continued to flow from Kongo to Rome to Lisbon to the Vatican. Some requested bishops, some asked for books, some expressed heartbreak. All of them reveal a kingdom trying to hold on to itself while the world around it redrew the rules. Here's something quirky. One letter from the 1600s includes a detailed request for musical instruments, specifically European lutes and viols. The man of Kongo apparently wanted to incorporate them into local ceremony. Imagine it, a royal court where drumming hands learn stringed chords. Music that crosses oceans without asking permission. One Portuguese visitor, somewhat bewildered, recorded seeing a Kongo prince reading Latin poetry aloud, and then leading a local ritual involving a carved turtle and a bowl of rainwater. He described it as confusing, but graceful. You nod. That's about right. Some scholars now refer to the Kingdom of Kongo as a contact zone, a place where cultures didn't just meet, but merged, conflicted, danced, bled, and persisted. A crossroads, if you like, not a collision. And those letters, surviving in European archives, faded, creased, occasionally smudged by fingerprints, are quiet proof. They show a kingdom that was literate, diplomatic, and self-aware. One that didn't wait for discovery, because it had already discovered itself centuries before. You sit now on a hillside overlooking the river valley. The wind is soft. Insects hum like tiny lullabies. And you think about letters. Not emails, not texts, but handwritten pleas that crossed oceans in wooden hulls, seeking answers that often never came. Yet they were written anyway. Because to write is to insist that you exist. You pull the charm from your pocket. It's shaped like a tiny hand. 5 fingers, 1 broken. You think of King Afonso's hands, perhaps gripping a stylus, perhaps pressed in prayer, perhaps reaching out across time. The river flows below, the wind speaks above, and somewhere, maybe in Portugal, maybe in a dusty drawer in the Vatican, a letter waits unread, still smelling faintly of smoke and ink, still hoping. The path curves into familiar ground again. If anything can feel familiar in a place where time melts like sugar in tea. You reach the outskirts of a village where 3 flags fly on a crooked wooden pole. One bears a cross, one bears a star, and the last, it's just a word, Kongo, painted in weathered white letters. Names matter here, they always have. You sit near an old well, listening to the wind play with syllables in the trees. And tonight's lullaby is all about names, how they shift, stick, vanish, and return, because few regions on Earth have worn as many names as this one. Start with Kongo. That's what the kingdom called itself. The people were Bakongo, the land was Kongo dia Ntotila, and the capital was Mbanza Kongo, a kingdom of spirit and soil. Then came the Portuguese, and the name became Kongo, easier to pronounce in Lisbon maybe, or just easier to write on shipping manifests. The K became a C, the diacritics vanished, and just like that, a new geography was born, one rooted not in culture but in convenience. Later still, during the 20th century, things became even messier. The area we now call the Democratic Republic of the Congo was once the Belgian Congo. Meanwhile, neighbouring French territories were labelled the Republic of the Congo. If you're wondering how 2 countries ended up sharing the same name, separated by a single river, well, colonialism doesn't always prioritise clarity. But wait, it gets stranger. In the 1970s, Mobutu Sese Seko, the ruler of what was then the Congo Zaire, renamed the entire country Zaire, an old Portuguese interpretation of the Kikongo word Nzadi, meaning the river that swallows all rivers poetic, if politically convenient. For nearly 25 years, maps around the world showed Zaire in big block letters. But in 1997, after Mobutu's regime collapsed, the name was switched back to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As for the other Congo, the Republic of the Congo, formerly French Congo, it kept its name. So now we have two Congos. Still, in 2025, geography loves a callback. And here's the dreamy part. These names, despite all their layers, still carry echoes of the original. Deep in rural Angola, you'll still hear elders refer to Congo as if it never stopped existing. In parts of Brazil, religious ceremonies to this day include invocations to spirits described as of the Congo. The K persists like a whispered correction. Historians still argue over whether the renaming of Congo-related lands was intentional erasure or the natural churn of empire and statehood. But the result is the same. A powerful, ancient identity scattered into fragments, worn as patches by modern nations that often don't even teach its full story in schools. You listen as a group of children plays nearby. One of them wears a t-shirt that says Zaire 1974, a retro souvenir from a time he wasn't alive for. He doesn't know the boxing match that happened that year, Ali versus Foreman in Kinshasa, or the Cold War politics bubbling beneath it. But he likes the shirt, and somehow that name lives again in cotton and curiosity. In another village, you hear someone joke that Congo changes names more often than chickens change feathers. It's meant affectionately, but beneath the joke is a deep understanding. Names aren't just labels, they are maps of memory. And in this part of the world, memory is stubborn. Even the river carries it. Locals still refer to it in whispers as Nzadi Mpembe, the Great Devourer. And if you sit long enough beside its banks as you're doing now, it does feel like it swallows more than just water. It swallows time, identity, stories. You look back at the flagpole again. The word Congo flutters, alone but proud. Not Democratic Republic, not French, not Zaire, just Congo. And that, you realise, is a kind of resistance. Because no matter how many times the lines have been redrawn or the names rewritten, the old name, the real name, still slips through like a root cracking concrete. It lives in lullabies. It lives in prayers. It lives in the hesitation people show before saying Congo instead of Congo, like their tongues remember the older rhythm. And tonight, you remember too. You whisper it softly like a password between sleep and story. Congo. The trail grows quieter now, dustier too. The trees thin out into wide, sun-bleached plains. You pass termite mounds the size of small cottages, like accidental architecture made by insects who never learn to stop building. And just ahead, a fence. Not much of one. Rusty posts, a sagging wire, and a crooked sign that says Zona Fronteiricha, border zone. This is the edge. Not the edge of a country, exactly. The edge of an idea. You're in modern-day Angola now, near the northern province of Cabinda, one of the last places where the old boundaries of the Congo Kingdom still quietly haunt the present. The border here is sharp on maps, but soft on the ground. There's no wall, no checkpoint, just this invisible thread drawn over a century ago by men who never walked this land. You step over the wire, and no alarm sounds. Chickens cluck nearby, a man on a bicycle waves. For most people here, the border is more suggestion than reality. Here's the oddity. Cabinda is actually disconnected from the rest of Angola, separated by a thin sliver of the Republic of the Congo. On a map, it looks like someone misplaced a puzzle piece. Historians still argue whether this disjointed geography was a colonial blunder, a deliberate political move, or just the cartographic equivalent of forgetting to save your progress before moving a shape. But to the people living here, it's more than inconvenience. It's a legacy of broken geography. You sit near a roadside fruit stand. The vendor offers you palm nuts and a slice of mango. She tells you, without prompting, that her grandmother always said this land was part of Congo. Before the Portuguese came, she shrugs. Before the Belgians, it was just Congo. You nod, and she smiles. But the border came, she says, and then we had to start choosing which side of our own land we belonged to. That's the strange cruelty of these lines. They turn one home into two nations, one story into competing narratives. You ask where her family goes to market. Both sides, she says. Depends who's selling salt cheaper. Even today, many families straddle the border. Some have cousins in the Republic of the Congo, others in Angola, and all of them share food, language, jokes. It's not geography that binds them, it's relationships. Which side of the fence their feet are on rarely changes where their hearts belong. And here comes the ghost. Many of these families still perform rituals that originate from the Congo royal courts. Blessings with water poured from east to west. Drums struck in 3-beat patterns meant to invoke the lineage of kings. Names like Nzinga, Lukeni, and Afonso appear in baptism ceremonies, in songs, and occasionally even in passport applications. It's not nostalgia, it's continuity. There's a story told in some villages about a ghost border that only chickens can see. The tale goes that if a chicken crosses into the wrong territory, it forgets how to come home. It's a silly story. Or maybe it's a warning. Or maybe, like many things here, it's both. Even governmental officials in this area admit it's complicated. Some documents still refer to former Congo territories. There have been occasional attempts to unite Congo-descended peoples in cultural festivals, reunions, even political movements. But the modern states, Angola, Congo, the DRC, each carry their own complex agendas. And Congo as a concept doesn't quite fit into any of them. You walk past a small school where children recite the alphabet in Portuguese, but sing folk songs in Kikongo. The teacher waves and offers you sugar water. They learn both, she says. One for the test, one for the ancestors. And that's the whole story, isn't it? The borders may exist on paper, in treaties and dusty archives, but in the quiet back roads of this landscape, they fray, they blur, they become suggestion. You pass a roadside shrine made of 3 stones and a single candle. Someone has etched a name in the dirt. Ntinu Wene. The king lives. You sit beside it, the afternoon sun warm on your back, and you wonder how many other ghost kingdoms exist, hidden just behind the next hill, tucked inside lullabies, or sewn into the hem of a ceremonial cloth. Kingdoms that never left, even when the world stopped remembering them. And here in this place, where Angola becomes not Angola, where maps fold in awkward zigzags, you understand something quiet but steady. Geography doesn't always win. Sometimes memory holds the line. The sun is lower now, tilting gold across the fields. You walk through rows of maize and cassava, toward the coast, where land meets water with a hush instead of a roar. Your feet crunch softly on shell-strewn paths, and ahead, something catches your eye. At first you think it's a mirage, a collection of shapes bobbing gently on the sea, but as you get closer it becomes clear. It's a village, a floating village, built of lashed-together logs, bundles of reeds, and what looks like old boat hulls turned upside down and repurposed as roofs. A man waves from a canoe and paddles toward you. "Welcome to the island," he says, grinning. It doesn't have a name, it's made of boats. This isn't fiction. Across parts of the Congo River Delta, and even along the Atlantic edges of Angola, people have constructed floating homes and fishing platforms that defy the traditional rules of geography. They're not marked on any official map. They appear and disappear, shifting with the tides, the seasons, and the needs of the community. You're led along a plank path that bobs softly underfoot. Children leap between floating platforms like it's nothing. Chickens roost inside a canoe tied to the dock. One woman is cooking on what looks like a converted oil drum set on a raft of palm trunks. You're not dreaming, but the place feels like something the sea imagined. And here's where things tilt into the uncanny. There's a story passed down here, older than the engines and plastic buckets, older than the colonial maps. It says that once, long ago, an entire city broke off from the land and floated away. Not in metaphor, literally, drifted out to sea. Some say it was punishment for pride, others claim it was a group of villagers escaping Portuguese soldiers. A few believe it was part of the Congo Kingdom itself, displaced, dislocated, refusing to die. Historians, as always, have their doubts. They call it a folk tale, perhaps born of memories of migration or great floods. But even they admit the geography makes it just plausible enough. In a place where river deltas shift yearly, where land becomes water and water becomes land, a drifting community isn't entirely out of the question. Some researchers even note that in the 1800s a few European shiplogs mention floating settlements sighted off the coast near Luanda. Groups of huts and fires seen from a distance, then gone the next day. Mist, mirage, or memory? You sit with an elder now, aboard a broad raft that functions as the village's common hall. He tells you that his grandmother used to say their family came from a land that isn't there anymore. When asked where it was, she simply pointed toward the horizon and said, "Where the kings sleep." There are relics here too. A carved post believed to be from an old Kongo palace, still used as a pillar in a floating hut. A tattered flag with the old cross and star insignia, half draped over a clothesline. And in one corner of the raft, a copper gong, rumoured to have once hung in a church near Mbanza, Congo, before being stolen, sold, lost, and eventually recovered by a fisherman who pulled it out of the surf. Even if none of it is verifiable, it's all true here. And isn't that what geography sometimes forgets? That maps only tell part of the story. That the ground doesn't always have to be solid for it to be home. One young woman explains how they move the floating village during the dry season. "We follow the fish," she says simply, "and the cool wind." She points toward the east. Sometimes we drift closer to land, sometimes farther, but we're always here. You think of the maps that place Congo firmly inland. You think of the treaties that carved it up with straight lines and anchors, and then you think of this raft, a village that defies every inch of cartography. What if part of Congo did float away? Not the soil, but the soul. Maybe this is how kingdoms survive. Not by fortresses or borders, but by memory, by drift, by adaptation. You stay on the raft as the sun sets, painting the sea with ribbons of orange and pink. Someone offers you cassava dumplings and a cup of palm wine that tastes like sunlight, filtered through bark. You sip slowly, rocked by the rhythm of the waves. The sky above begins to freckle with stars. And as you lie back on the warm wooden slats, you hear someone singing. It's an old song, soft, steady. The language is Kikongo. The melody wanders, and just before you drift off you think, this island may not have a name, but you know where you are. You're in Congo. Still, you wake to the sound of water lapping gently against the side of the raft. A soft fog hangs over the river delta, blurring the line between sky and sea. It's hard to tell where the world begins and ends here. Everything feels hushed, even the birds, like the land itself is holding its breath. The floating village is already alive. Someone's boiling fish broth. A child is making careful repairs to a net. And in the far distance, across the water, you hear drums. Not loud, not urgent, just steady, familiar. You ask where the sound is coming from. "Brazil," someone jokes without looking up. Everyone laughs. But then someone else, more serious, points west. "From our family," they say simply, "the ones we sent across the sea." That's how it's spoken here, not as a tragedy, not as a statistic, but as a connection, frayed, stretched, nearly forgotten, but never truly severed. And today, we follow it. Back on land, you walk inland toward a village preparing for a ceremony. Smoke curls from bundles of herbs. Women grind cassava to a soft paste. Men sing while sharpening machetes, not for violence, but for ritual. You ask what's happening, and an elder answers without missing a beat, "The spirits are returning." The ceremony is called Makumbi, a summoning of ancestral presence through song, dance, and shared memory. What makes this one special is its direction. It's not just calling spirits from the past, it's calling echoes from across the Atlantic. Because in northeastern Brazil, in Bahia and Maranhão, ceremonies are happening at the exact same time. Candles are being lit, drums beaten, and the names being invoked. Nzinga, Afonso, Wene, names from Congo. How is that possible? Well, the Atlantic didn't just carry people, it carried culture. And some of that culture, astonishingly, remains almost unchanged. Candomblé, the Afro-Brazilian spiritual tradition still includes spirits and deities whose roots trace directly back to the Congo basin. The Bantu pantheon survived, tucked inside Portuguese names, layered into Catholic rituals, hidden in plain sight until it was safe to show again. Even certain dances in Brazil, like the umbigada, where dancers touch bellies to initiate the next participant, mirror traditional Congo celebrations. Same rhythm, same circular form, same purpose, remembrance. Historians still argue how much of this was preserved intentionally versus unconsciously. But one thing is clear, the cultural imprint of the Congo is still alive, far beyond the reach of its ancient borders. And then there's language. Many Afro-Brazilian communities still use Kikongo words in ritual settings, songs, or even daily slang. Not entire sentences, just fragments, fossilized in use, like shells embedded in stone. You pass a mural in the village. It shows two trees, one with roots in Africa, one blooming in Brazil. Between them is a river, painted with both crocodiles and dolphins. Above it, a word, Nongi. It means path or teaching. You sit beneath that mural now and think of all the invisible threads that bind these places. A grandmother in Angola humming the same tune as a teenager in Salvador, both unaware that the other exists but connected all the same. And it's not just tradition, it's taste too. The dish called vatapá in Brazil, made of peanuts, shrimp and coconut milk, has a spiritual cousin in Congo's Mwamba, a peanut-based stew with nearly identical texture and heart. You realise the flavour survived, even when people could not name their source. They cooked what they remembered, or maybe what their bones remembered for them. A boy passes by you carrying a radio. It crackles to life. A Brazilian samba song comes through, clear as glass, bouncing with rhythm. An elder hears it and begins tapping their cane in time, completely in sync. Maybe memory doesn't just travel, maybe it dances. You walk to the edge of the village and watch a group of young people practicing a performance for the ceremony. Their bodies move in practiced rhythm. Their hands draw invisible circles in the air. The movements are old, some say older than the kingdom itself. And suddenly one of them turns to you and says, without prompting, "Still Congo, still here." You nod. Not because it's true on a map, but because it's true in the marrow of the land, in the laughter of markets, in the call and response of distant cousins whose feet never left the rhythm. They never needed to. Evening again, the kind where the air turns the colour of rust and lavender. You walk slowly now, not because you're tired, but because the ground feels heavy with stories, like each step stirs up another layer of memory just under the surface. The wind picks up in little spirals, carrying the scent of earth, oil and fire smoke. You're heading back toward Mbanza, Congo, or what's left of it, the former capital, the seat of kings, now a quiet town with unassuming houses and satellite dishes, tilted toward the equator. But history still lives here, if you listen close. And one of the places where it whispers loudest, a small building that looks like a church, but not quite. It has no steeple. Its paint peels like old parchment. Inside, there's a dusty exhibit of maps. You walk slowly past them, blinking at the curled edges and faded lines. Some show Congo sprawling proudly across Central Africa, a confident splash of ink. Others show it as a tiny coastal blob squeezed by foreign borders. And then, there it is. One map, a beautiful mess. Someone, long ago, tried to draw both sides of the Atlantic on a single sheet, labelling Brazil and Angola with nearly identical river names. It's amateur work, clearly. The coastlines don't match, proportions are off. And yet, there's something tender about it. You can tell the cartographer was trying to understand a connection they couldn't fully explain. A line arcs across the ocean, linking two Congos. Was it a mistake? Maybe. But some mistakes are more honest than facts. The label on the map reads, Congo-Brazil Trade Axis, 17th century, unknown source. You stare at it longer than you expect. The handwriting is jagged, uncertain. A compass rose is drawn in the corner, but it points not to the north, but to the past. And this is where we meet the mapmaker. Not literally, of course, they're long gone. But you start to picture them, hunched over a desk, squinting by candlelight, perhaps a Portuguese sailor turned clerk, Or maybe a Congo scholar, sketching memories before they faded. Someone caught between two continents trying to fit both on one page. Cartographers of the early modern world had a tough job. They didn't just chart terrain, they interpreted rumour, fear and desire. Rivers were added based on hearsay. Mountains were erased when they proved inconvenient. Islands came and went depending on the whim of a captain or the brag of a merchant. Historians still argue whether early African maps drawn by Europeans were based on actual journeys, or just repurposed scraps from earlier Greek geography. But there's no doubt that many maps of the Congo were improvised. Coastlines copied from other regions, rivers drawn where none flowed, towns added for political flattery. There's even a theory, murmured among geography nerds, that one colonial mapmaker accidentally duplicated the entire mouth of the Congo River on both sides of the Atlantic, thinking he was drawing two different places. When no one corrected it, others copied the error, and suddenly you have Congo appearing in South America by accident. You walk outside the museum and sit beneath a massive baobab tree. Its trunk is gnarled like knotted hands. Children play nearby, laughing in a mix of Kikongo and Portuguese. You think of all the borders you've seen, visible and invisible, and how a single mislabel on a map could start a centuries-long echo. It's easy to dismiss the mapmaker's mistake as sloppy. But maybe, in a strange way, it was truer than the maps that got it right. Because Congo did end up on both sides of the Atlantic. Not physically, but culturally, spiritually, in song, in food, in rhythm, in sorrow. Maybe the mapmaker sensed that. Maybe that messy line across the sea wasn't an error. Maybe it was a prophecy. You lean your head against the trunk of the tree. It's warm from the sun and its bark smells faintly of vanilla and ash. Overhead, a small fruit drops to the ground with a soft thunk, and the breeze carries one last forgotten detail to your ear. In the 18th century, a Portuguese mapmaker once wrote in the margin of his sketchbook, "In lands of the Congo, the past is not buried, it lives in layers." You close your eyes, you believe him. The sun is gone now. What's left is moonlight, the kind that doesn't just fall on the land, but settles into it, like a soft blanket draped across hills and rooftops. The streets of Mbanza, Congo are hushed. A dog barks once in the distance, then stops. The only sound now is wind moving slowly through the tall grass on the edges of town, like fingers combing through old hair. You walk one final time through this place, but this time you see things differently. There's a mural on the side of a concrete house, simple, painted in 100 fading shades. It shows a king in silhouette, standing with one hand raised, his cloak made from rivers. And behind him, stretching out across the wall, are two continents, both shaded the same colour. Still Congo. A child walks past, barefoot and humming a tune you vaguely recognise. It's the same lullaby you heard in the floating village, then again near the river, and once, briefly, in that tiny church where the altar was carved from mango wood. The melody has no beginning or end. It just is, like the kingdom itself. You arrive at a small modern house, its yard lit by one hanging bulb. Inside, a family is gathered, not for ceremony, just dinner. A big bowl of maize porridge in the middle, children squabbling over the last of the sauce, the father humming softly while cleaning his nails with a twig. The grandmother, ancient, wrapped in layers of colour, nods to you. "You came far," she says, "but you never left." She speaks Kikongo. You don't understand every word, but somehow you know exactly what she means. Because this place doesn't vanish, it changes, it adapts. And even if it's split by borders, renamed by empires, redrawn by tired mapmakers, it persists. You sit with them for a while, sharing food, sharing presents. The TV buzzes in the corner, playing a Brazilian soap opera. Outside, a rooster crows at the wrong time. No one seems to mind. And as you leave, quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping baby on a woven mat, you pass a hand-painted sign on the door. It reads, "Congo dia Ntotila. The kingdom still stands." You believe it, not because the borders say so, but because the people do. Because the language is spoken, because the rhythms are danced, because the names are remembered, because the land remembers too, and now, slowly, gently, like a final breath exhaled by the earth. You begin to fade into sleep. You lie down now, wherever you are, under warm blankets, beneath quiet lights. Maybe the hum of a fan or the tick of a distant clock echoes in your space. Let it echo. Let it guide you. Take a slow breath. Let your body remember softness. You've travelled across kingdoms tonight, some made of soil, others of song. You've walked between trees that whisper history, listened to rivers that remember more than maps ever could.